My dear people of God, I have to tell you, I think this gospel today from St. Luke really speaks to the United States of America in the year 2025. First of all, Jesus gives us the two great commandments. Love God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind, and all your strength. And the second one is, love your neighbor as you love yourself. But then we're told, in order to justify himself, the man asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. So why does that speak so much to the people of the United States in 2025? Well, Jesus was speaking to a Jewish audience. And the Jews back then hated the Samaritans. They hated them with a passion. And the feeling was mutual. The Samaritans, for the most part, couldn't stand the Jews. Now, why is that? Well, the Samaritans were descended from the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel. So Israel and Judah at one point had been one country. Under King David and King Solomon, they were one country. But then after the death of King Solomon, the northern kingdom of Israel split off from the kingdom of David, and they started their own country. And they not only split off from the king of David, but they split away from the temple, because the king of Israel didn't want his people going down to Jerusalem to worship God. And so they split away from the temple as well. And so he built his own, the king of the northern kingdom built his own altars and his own little temples so that people could worship false gods with false worship. Then the northern kingdom was conquered on a few occasions. Some of the conquerors moved in and they intermarried with the people of the 10 tribes. So for the Jewish people, they saw the Samaritans as traitors to the faith. They saw the Samaritans as traitors to God's plan. They saw the Samaritans as traitors to the kingdom of David. Basically, they saw the Samaritans as half-breeds and wanted nothing to do with them. The Samaritans, for their part, saw the Jews as judgmental pigs, and they wanted nothing to do with them. So they had been one nation. In fact, they were one big family. They were the 12 tribes of Israel. But they ended up hating each other. How does this speak to America in 2025? Because we're one nation, and yet we have so much division, where there are many people who actually hate each other. So for instance, there are millions and millions of people who hate the President of the United States. And many of them hate anybody who voted for the President of the United States. There are others who hate the former President of the United States. And some of them hate anybody who voted for him. So my guess is if Jesus were teaching physically in New York City today, he would tell the parable of the good Trump supporter. Or if he was teaching in rural Wyoming, he might tell the parable of the good Joe Biden supporter. But folks, the point Jesus is making is we're supposed to love one another despite our differences. In fact, Jesus is commanding us to love one another. Remember, this was an answer to the question of what must I do for eternal life? In other words, what must I do to be saved? And he told the story of the Good Samaritan. You need to love people who are different than yourself. You need to see them as your neighbor. Don't hate them, love them. Now, not only is the animosity between people of different political leanings today very contrary to the law of love, but folks, there's even a more profound problem. There are basically two teams in our country. There's the Democratic team and the Republican team. And there are many who allow the team to determine their stand on important moral issues. So rather than seeing ourselves as part of Team Jesus, which is what we should first and foremost see ourselves as part of Team Jesus, they see themselves partly as Team Democrat or Team Republican, and they allow the team to determine their morality. So for instance, the Democratic team identifies as pro-choice. In other words, they think it's just fine if people can destroy their innocent children in their mother's womb. Now, I've told you many times how that is an abomination in the sight of God. It kills children, it destroys the spiritual life of men and women. It has set up countless people for eternal damnation as they've chosen to destroy innocent human life. And I've told you many times the people whose salvation I really worry about are there people who take the position of, well, you know, I'm personally opposed, but I can't force my morality on anybody else. I call that the Pontius Pilate approach to abortion. Because you remember, Pontius Pilate was opposed to the crucifixion of Jesus. And Pontius Pilate had the power to save Jesus, but he refused to do it. He washed his hands of his fate. Okay? So many Christians allow their political party to determine their stand on morality, even on the sacredness of human life. But the other team, the Republican team, have taken a very hard stand on illegal immigration. The present attitude of the party, it hasn't always been the attitude, but the present attitude is they broke our laws, they have to be deported. With no nuance, no like how long have they been here, how good a residents have they been, they must be deported. Now folks, we gotta ask, why are there millions of illegal immigrants in our country today? It's because presidents from both parties, politicians from both parties, have given a wink and a nod to poor people throughout the world. They said for the voters, they said, oh, they can't come here, but then to the rest of the world, they're going, you can't come here. You got to respect our borders. You got to obey our laws. How is it a wink and a nod? Because it was known throughout the world that you can easily enter the United States, and once you get in, you can stay here. The border has not been well enforced for the last 40 years. And millions of people yearning for a better life saw that wink and nod and came here, and now they're living in fear. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about people who came here and lived as criminals, people who committed murder or dealt drugs or harmed women and children or other people. You know, as far as I'm concerned, round them up and get them out of here. That's personal opinion, that's not teaching the church, okay? I'm talking about housekeepers in hotels all around our country. I'm talking about people who have been landscapers. I'm talking about people who have worked in factories or in the trades and have just tried to make a better life for themselves and supported their family. People who came here seeking the American dream, just like my mom came in the 1950s, or my grandmother came in the 1920s. The big difference then was the laws were enforced. Back then, there weren't politicians encouraging people to come here illegally. Now, are there people who are really guilty in all this mess? Absolutely. Their names are George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and of course, Joe Biden. They treated these poor people like pawns in a chess game. The Republicans did it because their big donors want cheap labor. And if they're here illegally, they can get them really cheap, and of course, they can't stand up for themselves because they can get deported. The Democrats allowed it because they saw these immigrants as their future voters and would hand them power. So now we have millions and millions of people living here, and right now many of them are living in fear. Folks, can we be like the Good Samaritan and treat them with compassion? Can we be merciful as individuals? Can we be merciful as a nation? You know, I hear people say, they broke our laws, we got to get rid of them. But you know, folks, there's not a person in this church who has not broken the laws of God. Do we want God to say to us, you broke my laws, you're not welcome in heaven? You broke my laws, I'm deporting you to hell? After all, Jesus said the way we judge others is how God is going to judge us. And so it's pretty clear in today's gospel, Jesus is telling us that these people are our neighbors, and he's commanding us to treat them with love and compassion. Folks, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, don't let the party determine your morality. We've got to be first and foremost on Team Jesus. Jesus who taught us to care for the poor. Jesus who taught us to love our neighbor. Jesus who taught us to be compassionate to those in needs. So we need to stand up for a preborn, innocent human life. And we need to stand up for poor migrants who responded to the wink and nod that our politicians gave them. There's a lot of anger in our country today about this, but we got to remember, it's our politicians who failed us. They failed to protect the borders. They failed to enact fair and just laws. They fail to treat the poorest of the poor with dignity. You and I need to treat these human beings made in the image and likeness of God, these human beings who are our brothers and sisters. We need to be like the Good Samaritan who treated the man who fell victim to robbers with dignity. Let's not lash out at anger with people who saw the wink and nod and came here, just like my mom came here, just like my grandmother came here, just like many of your ancestors came here, looking for a better life. The way these people have been treated is criminal. It's really criminal. The ones guilty are our political leaders over the past 40 years. Let's not treat the poor as pawns because of what our political leaders are responsible for. Jesus is calling us to be like the Good Samaritan and to treat people with love and dignity. And that's all I got for you.